Evolution or creation? Being a little disabled this week gave me an opportunity to look a little deeper at an issue that all of us have, of course, been curious about. Living in America today, living in the Western world today is like being in a prize fight and being in a corner and getting beaten and pummeled and pummeled and pummeled. You turn on your television, you look at the curriculum that comes out in much of the school system, and you are constantly bombarded with evolution. Now, back in 1925, with the Scopes trial, which a movie, Inherit the Wind, was made at some point, there was a debate going on between a couple of very high-powered lawyers, William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow, and they were going back and forth. They even put each other on the stand during this trial, and Clarence Darrow, who was the lawyer for the evolutionist side, this was to put it into the public school. One of his tricks was to put a wire in his cigar, which you could smoke in a courtroom back then, and that caused, whenever it would burn down, the ashes would maintain themselves and stay there, and it caused the jury to be totally focused on him while William Jennings Bryan was trying to make his case. But Clarence Darrow put William Jennings Bryan on the stand, and he asked him this question: did you know that a race of ape men lived 1 million years ago in your home state of Nebraska? And Bryan said, no, I didn't, and I don't believe it either. He brought in a leading pathologist, and the leading pathologist got up there and said, we have evidence that a race of ape men did, in fact, live in Nebraska 1 million years ago, and this made front page news, and they demanded the evidence of it, and they brought forth the evidence, and some of y'all are probably familiar with this. They brought forth a tooth. A tooth was their evidence, and out of that tooth, they exfoliated a jaw that they created around the tooth, a skull, a frame, and even put it beside a campfire with a club on the shoulder out of one tooth. In that same strata, a little time later, that same layer of soil, a little time later, they found another tooth identical to the first tooth, except for this one was attached to a jaw, which was attached to a skull, which was attached to a skeleton already. And you can see what it is down in the bottom left there. If you can make that out, it's a pig. It was a pig's tooth. And that was the catalyst of getting evolution taught in school. And what I have settled at, as I have looked at, and most of what I'm going to share with you this morning is what evolutionists say, most of what I've come to understand is that it is a war of faith. It is a religious war about a worldview. Either you're going with God or you're not going with God. If you're not going with God, regardless of what the evidence may or may not say, this is your road. And you are going to push down that road and hope by faith that the evidence will someday arrive for you. And that's where we're finding ourselves in this battle. And Howard Hendricks said, in the midst of a generation that's screaming for answers, Christians are stuttering. Most Christians are backing away and saying, I don't know how to deal with this. I'm not a professional scientist, so I'm not equipped to respond to this in any means, and I'm just going to try to take all the punishment I can, stay out of the way, and just hold on to my beliefs. We don't know how to handle it, and we are stuttering, and the world is wanting some semblance of confidence, some line of argument regarding what our beliefs are that God created, that we have meaning, that we have purpose, because it's a bigger issue than who did what. It's whether you have value, meaning, and purpose in life, or whether you sit here today as an accident, whether you sit here today as someone who's going nowhere and that death is going to leave you lifeless, with nothing beyond what you experienced as your heart beat while you walked this earth, as an accident that evolved from an amazing, miraculous event that just happened to have all the things fall together at once. And out of that came the creation we see. Science and the Bible are not supposed to be in conflict. In fact, one man said this. He said that this guy has a PhD in astronomy. He said the work of secular scientists or honest secular scientists is a friend and not a foe of Christians. Their efforts have given us some of the strongest evidences for our Creator, our God, and our Savior. That an honest evaluation of science is not the enemy of Christianity. It will ultimately define how amazing this creation is. That's why you have billions of years attributed to it, to try to find some possibility of this amazement coming into being, because it must have taken forever in time to do it. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the world. Jesus said in Mark 10, he said, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Psalms 19:1-4, these will come up there. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies announce what his hands have made. Day after day they tell the story. Night after night they tell it again. They have no speech or words. They have no voice to be heard. But their message goes out throughout all the world. Their words go everywhere on earth. If you just look at the creation, look at the stars, look at all that's been made. It's not necessarily a voice, but it is speaking loud. That there's a designer, there's a creator, that there's something behind this. Romans 1:20 said that there are things about God that people cannot see, his eternal power and all the things that make him God. But since the beginning of the world, those things have been easy to understand by what God has made. You can look at the creation, you can define the Creator. That there's purpose and love behind what he's done. So people have no excuse. And probably the main verse I want you to think about this morning is this verse out of 2 Thessalonians 2. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness. One of the things that you see today is that there has been a tremendous success in controlling the arena of debate. And in so doing, we have generations that have grown up being given one side of an argument. And giving that side of an argument as if it is a fact. Not to be addressed with any kind of debate unless you are an idiot. Time magazine in 1999 said Darwinism remains one of the most successful scientific theories ever promulgated. It's taught in schools as a fact. It's reinforced. If you just turn on your TV, you go to the zoo, you see all the signs that are placed around. You look at children's cartoons. You watch Discovery Channel. You watch National Geographic. Bob Russell said evolution has been repeated so often that to challenge it is equivalent to believing in a flat earth or a moon made of cheese. Darwinism, not evolution. In fact, I've heard evolutionists, as I've listened to some of them, describe it as that. It's a belief system built around what Darwin taught. They call it Darwinism rather than evolution, because it is a sense and of how it all came to being. And I'll tell you what, they are living in a room full of elephants, because there are some obvious things that need to be addressed that they're not doing. A man named Dr. Newton Thomason is a scientist for the Atomic Energy Commission. He said this: scientists that go about teaching that evolution is a fact of life are great con men. And the story they are telling may be the greatest hoax ever. In explaining evolution, we do not have one iota of fact. Dr. Etheridge of the British Museum said 9/10 of the theory of evolution is sheer nonsense, not founded on observation and wholly unsupported by fact. This museum is full of proofs of the utter falsity of the view. Sir Ambrose Fleming of the Philosophical Society, president of the Philosophical Society, said evolutionary theory is purely the product of imagination. Dr. Cecil Wakeley, a leading British surgeon, president of the Royal College of Surgeons: when I was a medical student, I taught the theory of evolution. I never believed it. Soren Lupthrup, a Swedish embryologist, said, I believe that one day the Darwinian myth will be ranked as the greatest deceit in the history of science. When this happens, many people will pose the questions, how did this ever happen. So I know that you sit there and you wonder, is there anybody out there that has any support for what I know in my heart, what I believe out of Scripture? They're everywhere. And their opinions are very strong about it. One man who is an evolutionist, he said, for 20 years, I thought I was working on evolution, but there was one thing I never knew about it. So for the last few weeks, I've tried putting a simple question to various people and groups of people. The question is, can you tell me anything you know about evolution? Any one thing that is true? I tried that question on the geology staff of the Field Museum of Natural History, and the only answer I got was silence. He says I tried it on the members of the evolutionary morphology seminar in the University of Chicago, a very prestigious body of evolutionists. And all I got was silence for a long time. And eventually one person said, yes, I do know one thing. It ought not to be taught in high school. It ought not to be taught in high school. I want to give you two of the tenets of faith of evolution. One of them is spontaneous generation. The other is mutation. I know we're doing a little different than we normally do on a Sunday morning, so if you're a visitor, come back tonight. We're going to have a Bible study out of Matthew. But with the Easter season upon us, and such a great opportunity to encounter folks, invite them to church, and just the fact that I feel like Christians are woefully ill-equipped. And it affects their faith. It affects their ability to have confidence in their witnessing when they're bombarded with something like this that is so strong in our society today. Tenet number one is that spontaneous generation, not regeneration, that the conditions on the planet Earth brought about that first one-celled animal. It says for many years evolution explained our origins by this. This means that under the proper conditions of temperature, time, and place, decaying material simply turns to organic life. Now this dominated evolutionary thinking. There's a man's picture down there in the bottom. That's Louis Pasteur. Until Louis Pasteur came along and he exposed it as utter foolishness by controlled laboratory conditions, and out of which he proved that that was not possible. And that was back in 1846. And at that point, any reputable scientist should have displaced this. But you'll find that some of them are still hanging on regardless of what he found. Astrophysicists have found that there are 60 criteria necessary for life, that life could not exist on this world. And they show us how amazing this creation is. And to believe that it could spontaneously generate with all these necessary things for life. Here's 9 of them. If the Earth's rotation was slower or faster, we couldn't exist here. If we were 2% closer or further from the sun, we couldn't exist. If the Earth had 1% change in sunlight, we couldn't exist. If the moon was smaller or larger, we couldn't exist. If the Earth was smaller or larger, we couldn't exist. If we had more than one moon, we couldn't exist. If the Earth's crust was thinner or thicker, we couldn't exist. If the oxygen-nitrogen ratio was greater or less, we couldn't exist. If the ozone layer was greater or less, we couldn't exist. And to believe that all that is possible out of a spontaneity that just happened takes tremendous faith. Takes tremendous faith when the proof of it is not there. Dr. George Wald, who's a Nobel Prize winner from Harvard University and an evolutionist, said one has only to contemplate the magnitude of this task to concede that spontaneous generation of a living organism is impossible. I wish it stopped right there, but look what he goes on to say. Yet here we are, as a result, I believe, of spontaneous generation. It's impossible, but he has nowhere else to go. He says, here I am, I believe it. The chances of winning the lottery, and you can see a guy there that looks like he won the lottery. Chance of winning the lottery is 10 to the 7th power, I am told. You win it twice in a row, 10 to the 14th power, and that's 14 zeros after the 10. The odds of evolution has been calculated as somebody winning the lottery thousands of times in a row. statistically placed at 10 with 160 zeros behind it. They have, statisticians have said that anything from 10 with 50 zeros behind it is statistically impossible or absurd. And yet, by faith, they believe it, like that says up there. Darwin himself said this: to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd to the highest degree. I was watching a very devout evolutionist, and one of his ways of trying to debate the obvious, he now says that his belief is that there's not just one universe, that there is an indefinite amount of universes. And when you have an indefinite amount of universes, out of that great number of universes, you're going to have one somewhere that this could happen. Because if you narrow it down to just one universe, it's insurmountable, the odds. But if you have an insurmountable number of universes, this man named Richard Dawkins says that was his belief now. It's like the idea that was, I think Sir Thomas Hoyle said, if a tornado goes through a junkyard then leaves a 747 with all that happens afterwards. Well, Dawkins' belief would be, well, that's possible if you have 1 billion tornadoes go through. Maybe one of them would leave a 747. A man named George Wald said, time, in fact, is the hero of the plot. The time with which we have to deal is of the order of 2 billion years. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time itself will perform the miracle. Time itself. That's why you keep hearing time growing. That's why when I was in school, it was millions of years. Probably a generation before, it was thousands, I don't know. But now we're in the billions. And if necessary, we'll go to the trillions. Because time has to be the hero of the plot, he says. Well, there was a statistician who computed. His name is Dr. James Coperidge from the Center of Probability Research in Biology. He applied the probability of a single cell coming into existence by chance, and he computed the entire world, the elements that available at the time, the amino acids combining, and he increased the computations to 1 1/2 trillion times faster. So if time went by 1 1/2 trillion times faster than it does right now, so he could try to get a sense of what time could do to bring that single protein molecule by chance. He said it would take 10,262 years sped up to 1 1/2 trillion times faster than the normal rate. To get the smallest human cell, this is just a protein molecule, to get the smallest human cell, he computed that it would take 101,119 or 841 years, or 10,119,841 years at that accelerated rate. And he said to write that number on a piece of paper, you'd have to fill up the entire known universe with paper before you could write the number. That's how big the number is. Of how the probability of bringing about the smallest human cell. Time. There's not enough time when you're honest even about time. The second thing is besides the spontaneous generation, is mutations. Mutations. And a mutation is where a minor change takes place within animals, and they gradual changes in various species is mutation. But their belief is given enough time, billions of years, that an amoeba would eventually mutate into an invertebrate, then that would mutate into an amphibian, that would mutate into a reptile, that would mutate into an ape, and then he would mutate into a man. That means that you should have a fossil record that gives evidence of all the mutations that have come along the way. That should reveal all of those things. There should be hundreds of millions of half-developed fish and half reptiles and half apes and half men and all those things. But instead, you got just the opposite in the fossil record. And Darwin came along and he said that the fossil record, the lack of fossils, is perhaps the most obvious and serious objection to his theory. And he believed that that would be rectified as they discovered more fossils. Well, since his day, the knowledge of fossils has obviously grown, but there's less evidence today because they have negated some that they thought were this and that, and they weren't. It actually shows that there were not more, and that there were sudden appearances in the fossil record in the animal kingdom, no evidence of transitional forms. In fact, if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, I've been to the Grand Canyon a long time ago, and it's an amazing place, but one of the things that it gives us is the opportunity to see strata. And if you go down the Grand Canyon, they will have named all the different levels of the strata that's there. You move down through the canyon, you'll see the Mississippi, the Devonian, the Cambrian stratas, all of them tagged by scientists as you go down the canyon. You can do this if you got a big enough side of a mountain or a roadbed that's been cut for a road that they're putting there. You can see different strata that's there. But the Cambrian is the last strata that has any fossils in it. It's the last one that has any fossils in it. And the fossils that are there is full of the fossils of major animals that we have today. So you would assume that the level under that one, the Precambrian, would be full of transitional forms that would lead up to the fossils that were in the next level. And it's not. The big question is, where are the ancestors of the ones that are in that final strata of fossils? And it should be there. As evolutionists look at this, one of them, named Dr. Daniel Axelrod of the University of California, says it's one of the major unsolved problems of geology and evolution. Another one, who's the crown prince of evolution, George Gaylord Simpson, says the sudden appearance of life is not only the most puzzling feature of the whole fossil record, but its greatest apparent inadequacy. The one thing that it does show there is that you have in that one strata the sudden creative act of God, bringing about all the major creatures we know in a sudden moment. Now let me tell you this morning that you don't know it, maybe you do know it, but you believe in evolution. You believe in evolution, the right kind of evolution, because there are two types of evolution. One of them is micro and the other is macro. You believe in micro. Creationists believe in microevolution. That's why we've got two dogs at home, and one of them's a little squirt and the other one's a big dog. Because breeds of dog come out of the development of time and mutations, minor mutations within a species. Not creating brand new species, but within a species. That's why you have dairy cattle that are bred, mutated, to provide more milk production. That's why you have bacteria that develops immunity to antibiotics. That's all part of microevolution, and that happens. That's why you look across the globe and you see all different types of people that have adapted in whatever areas that they are, and it's affected so much of their appearance and other things. Macroevolution, Darwin's claim, is how life began millions of years ago with a simple single cell that creatures that develop through mutation and natural selection into the various plants and animals that we have today. And evolution as a theory, Darwinism, demands macroevolution. That given enough time, that mutations will appear and become brand new species. A frog becomes not a different type of frog. A frog becomes a bird. Given enough time, something like that could happen. In Genesis chapter 1, 10 times it uses this same phrase. After its kind. God made the beast of the earth after its kind. The cattle after their kind. Everything that creeps upon the earth after its kind. And God saw that it was good. The word for kind relates to species or families of things. It doesn't talk about things becoming different. A cat, although you have lots of different cats, cats are cats. You have lots of different dogs, dogs are dogs, horses are horses, and men are men. There is none of this cross-species mutations that they say are necessary given enough time. Selective breeding happens. That's why you got seedless oranges. One of the great inventions of the world is a seedless orange. A seedless grape. That's great. I love a seedless grape. But that's mutation. I mean, that is micro-development, selective breeding, all those things. After its kind, though. The common ancestor that they look for to prove evolution. I'm thinking of revelation now. Evolution. That missing link is not there. And someone said the whole chain is not there. What God created, God created. There has been some variation within the species itself, but nothing like the mutation they talk about. Darwin said this when he wrote The Origin of the Species. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. If you can't show the development to get to that one point where you've got that species, you can't show all the earlier stages, he says, my theory would break down. Later on in life, in his later writings, in Life and Letters, he said this. He said, there are 2 to 3 million species on Earth, a sufficient field, one might think, for observation. But it must be said today, many years after he wrote the first, that in spite of all the evidence of trained observers, not one change of the species to another is on record. That's Darwin saying that. Darwin wasn't as bad as we thought. It sounds like people grabbed him. He's a little too honest for a lot of what they want to share with us today. Charles Singer, in A Short History of Science of the 19th Century, said this. He said, evolution, perhaps unique among major science theories, in that the appeal to its acceptance is not that there is evidence for it. And one of the greatest gifts that God gave our generation was on May the 18th, 1980. The number one event to disprove the theory of evolution happened on that day. Mount St Helens. Almost 30 years ago exactly. When Mount St Helens blew up. Here you have this beautiful mountain. And it blew up with the power equivalent of 20 million tons of TNT, which is equivalent to 1,500 atomic bombs. And it went on for 15 hours. And the power behind all that continuance was 400 million tons of TNT, or 30,000 atomic bombs, which would be the equivalent of an atomic bomb exploding every second for 15 hours. That's how powerful that moment was with that volcano exploding. Geologists used to believe layers of volcanic rock were set apart by time. Mount St. Helens proved to the world forever that the sediment is laid down in multiple layers in a matter of hours. In one place, 25 feet of sediment was laid down in a single pass of an ash flow. And the ash from Mount St. Helens, 550 degrees, traveled 200 miles per hour down the sides of the mountain, taking with it 150 square miles of timber in a matter of 6 minutes' time. Over 20,000 trees were put in Spirit Lake, rootless trees. Were thrown in there. They became waterlogged and they sank down to the bottom in an upright position. Some of them came down and lay on top of the sediment. Others were buried deep within the multiple layers that were there, and they buried sideways. All this happened in a matter of hours. You know, in Yellowstone Park, they've got a place there called Specimen Ridge. Specimen Ridge has 27 layers of forest. Scientists have claimed for years that it took millions of years for those layers to settle there. There used to be a sign there that talked about all the time. Specimen Ridge looks exactly like Spirit Lake. Looks exactly like Spirit Lake. And it shows that what happened anywhere that looks like that could happen in a matter of hours. Laying down sediment, layer after layer after layer. So Mount St. Helens gave undeniable proof that time was not the hero. Time was not necessary for much of what they are trying to give credence to evolution by. It's giving evidence. It isn't evidence because it doesn't take time. Mount St. Helens proved that to us. A man named Scott Adams. He's a great scientist, cartoonist. He wrote the book, The Dilbert Future. He gives predictions in there, and prediction number 63 is this. Theory of evolution will be scientifically debunked in your lifetime. After all I've said, I've given you evolutionists for the most part. Why are we here? Why are we dealing with this like we're dealing with it? It's two reasons. Number one is faith. This is an issue of faith. The Scientific American in 1991, a man named Sir Francis Crick, he said the origin of life appears to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which have had to be satisfied to get it going. The more one studies paleontology, this is Lewis Trenchard Moore, who wrote Science and the Two-Tailed Dinosaur, said the more one studies paleontology, the more certain one becomes that evolution is based on faith alone. Exactly the same sort of faith which is necessary to have when one encounters the great mysteries of religion. A man named Arthur N. Field said, what is evolution based upon? Upon nothing whatever but faith. Upon belief in the reality of the unseen, belief in the fossils that cannot be produced, belief in the embryological experiments that refuse to come off. It is faith unjustified by works. Evolution, if you look at Darwin, if you look at what Darwin wrote, over 800 times when he wrote in The Origin of the Species, he used the phrase, we may suppose, or other phrases that were not certainties, but they showed guesswork and presumption that he had, based a lot upon what he's assumed would be discovered. We're almost 200 years after that, and it has not been discovered. Darwin wrote this. He said, and listen to this, I was a young man with uninformed ideas. I threw out queries, suggestions, wondering all the time over everything. And to my astonishment, the ideas took like wildfire. People made a religion out of them. People made a religion out of them. Faith. But the second, and I think this probably hammers it down more than anything, it's a moral choice. It's a moral choice. The beliefs that are so strong in evolution reveal the prejudices of not wanting to honestly deal with the truth about God. Neglecting to admit the holes that are there is a hope of never dealing with the truth about God, because evolution has given many, many people, and the reason they've embraced it, it's given them an excuse not to have faith in God. To have a hope that I'm not going to have to deal with an accountable moment of judgment. If God is a myth, sin's no big deal. I can do what I want. If Genesis isn't true, who sets the rules? God doesn't. I can set my own rules. It's a matter of moral choice. Survival of the fittest, I can walk on the weak all day long. Those who are less and weaker than me, can trample on them. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, I see no reason for attributing to man a significance in kind different from that which belongs to a baboon or a grain of sand. If evolution is true, then that is true as well. There is no significance for an accident. If you've created like an animal, you can live like an animal. Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of the Species, was subtitled. This is a subtitle. The Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. He believed the races of men were an evidence of evolution. The preservation of the favored races. It gave the right for one race to step upon another. It justified racism throughout the world. Karl Marx, the father of communism, read Darwin's book And he said it was a turning point in his life because he felt now he discovered the scientific foundation for communism. And he was so enamored with Darwin that he wanted to dedicate his book to communism to Darwin. Darwin's wife suggested he not let him do that. You look at Mao, you look at other communists, they murder, they mutilate. You look at Hitler, you look at Stalin, you look at Mussolini. They were all avowed evolutionists because it gave them the right to not worry about any accountability or justification. Evolution says that life is a chance. Creation says God created with intelligence and design. Evolution says you're just an overgrown ape. Creation says you were made in the image of God. Evolution says survival of the fittest. Creation says that God looks out for the weak. God cares about the hurting. Both of them are based on faith and science. Evolution is more of a faith issue than a scientific issue. Evolution, as we look at it today, as you have it pummeling you from the TV screen, is more of a faith than a science. Richard Dawkins is a strong evolutionist as well as an atheist. He wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker, and look at what he warns in that Blind Watchmaker. Biology is a study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. He says, don't let that fool you. It's going to look like it. Another man, co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, wrote in his book, What Mad Pursuit, biologists must continually keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Keep that in your mind, because you're going to gravitate the other way. This could be so amazing. You're going to think it's going to be created or designed, but don't let your mind go there. George Wall, professor of biology at Harvard, 1971 won the Nobel Prize of Biology. Listen to this. There are only two possibilities about how life arose. One is spontaneous generation arising to evolution. The other is a supernatural creative act of God. There's no third. Spontaneous generation, the belief that life arose from non-living matter, was scientifically disproved 120 years ago by Louis Pasteur, among others. That leaves us with only one other possible conclusion, that life arose as a supernatural creative act of God. You think, this guy's great. Look at what he goes on to say. I will not accept creation philosophically because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know to be scientifically impossible, spontaneous generation. It's a matter of faith and moral choice. Sir Arthur Keith, an evolutionist, said the only alternative to evolution is special creation by God. That is unthinkable. Scientist D.S. Watson, evolution is a theory universally accepted not because it can be proven by logical, coherent evidence, but because the only alternative is special creation, and that is clearly incredible. Romans chapter 1. Let me start to close with this. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godliness and ungodliness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, eternal power, divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. And although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for the images made to look like mortal men and birds, criminals, animals, and reptiles. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. It's very clear in the Bible what the condition of the heart of man is and what it does based on that. We're just playing a bigger game in our day, but the results the motives, all that's still the same. Creation answers three questions. What's the origin of life? The meaning of life? The value of life. And one of the things that evolution can never address is the transformation that happens in a heart when that person surrenders their life to God. That's a mutation that is macro, I guess. Because you are something brand new. And that's the only place it happens. It doesn't happen out there in the world they're trying to design, but they are denying what they're seeing happening, what they should be seeing, what we should be showing them to be true in this true change of becoming new creatures. It happens in the heart of a Christian. There's an anthropologist went to South America to study a primitive tribe. This tribe had been reached by a missionary. And he came and he lived with them, and he finally spoke to the chief one day and said, "You have a wonderful culture." He said, "But it's a shame that missionary came and infected your tribe with his religion." The chief said, "Well, you see that rock over there? We used to kill our enemies by knocking their skulls against that rock. That tree over there is where we had sacrificed unto our God. And if that missionary had not come and we had not learned about God, you'd be dinner tonight." Yeah, they evolved. Back to that one verse, and I'll close with it. They perish because they refuse to love the truth, and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion, so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth. Would you bow with me?